I recently lived through what can only be described as every homeowner's worst nightmare. Our HOA president brazenly let herself into my locked house and began rifling through our personal belongings like she had every right to be there. Her excuse? She claimed she was removing unauthorized violations, but the only thing that actually got removed that day was her freedom once we handed the footage over to the police. Let me take you back to the beginning. The first red flag was a greasy fingerprint smudged across my wife's jewelry box. I was 100 miles away, sitting in a silent hotel room, but there she was, Karen, clearly visible on our security feed, standing in our bedroom and digging through drawers as if she owned the place. My jaw clenched and my fists tightened with fury, while Sarah, calm as ever, simply zoomed in on the footage and rested her hand on my arm. We had been preparing for this moment for months. We always knew Karen was reckless, but we never expected her to cross a line so boldly and violate our home with such shameless audacity. Seeing it live on camera made it all real. No more guessing, no more doubt. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "This isn't about HOA rules," I growled. "This is a break-in, plain and simple." All she had taped to our door was a bogus citation for an unauthorized avian structure. A birdhouse, painted bright blue by our daughter before heading off to college. That birdhouse wasn't just decor. It was bait. We knew Karen's inflated ego and her master key would eventually lead her right into our trap. But what shocked us wasn't just that she entered, it was how far she went. She tore through closets, rummaged through our bedroom, and acted like she had absolutely nothing to lose. When she opened my sock drawer, that was the final straw. This wasn't about compliance. This was a full-on invasion. My heart pounded like a drum. "Jack," Sarah whispered, eyes still locked on the screen. "Let her keep going. The deeper, the better." And she was right. My fury ignited the spark, but her quiet strategy set the trap. Karen had no idea that every move she made was being recorded. Tiny cameras hidden in smoke detectors, digital clocks, even fake outlets, all motion activated, all feeding directly to a secure cloud she could never access or erase. We watched as she strolled into my office, casually brushed her fingers over my desk, picked up a framed photo of me and my dad, sneered at it, then set it back down with an arrogance that made my blood boil. That moment hit me hard. It wasn't about policy or neighborhood rules anymore. It was about control, about her relishing the power trip of violating a space where she was never welcome. Uninvited and shameless, she moved through our home like she owned it, not just to enforce any rule, but to prove she could invade our lives at will. A sickness infecting the quiet safety of our community, and at last, we had the antidote. "Okay, she's heading for the living room," Sarah murmured, eyes locked on the screen as she switched cameras with practiced ease, right past the so-called violation. Karen didn't even glance at the birdhouse that supposedly justified this trespass. No, her real target was much darker. She wanted control, power, a front-row seat to our private world. She drifted to the bookshelf and casually pulled out a photo album, flipping through it like she had a right to our memories. My stomach twisted into knots as she lingered on a picture from our last anniversary, Sarah and me smiling on a beach, and then, with no shame, snapped a photo of it with her phone. Why? Was she building some twisted dossier on us? Some power-fueled gallery of what she could take without permission? My blood was boiling now, fists clenched tight enough to shake. I wanted to storm in, watch the smug vanish from her face, but I held it together, for now. "That's it," I said through gritted teeth. "We have enough, breaking and entering. Theft." She even pocketed Sarah's silver locket like it was evidence. The plan was clear. We'd call the police, send them the live feed, and let them walk in mid-crime to drag her out in cuffs. Justice. Clean and direct. But Sarah, steady as ever, placed her hand gently over mine. "Not yet," she said. "Let her stay. Every second is another nail in her coffin." Her logic was ice-cold brilliance, while I was all heat and fury, but I nodded. We kept watching as Karen crept into the kitchen, rummaging through drawers, peeking in the fridge like she was on some bizarre HOA inspection for expired milk. It was absurd. Who does that? She moved like she had all the time in the world. No. Clue her every move was being streamed and saved in real time. Finally, she returned to the door, hesitated just long enough to shoot a look of disgust at the birdhouse, and gave it a petty little kick. One last spiteful gesture before unlocking the deadbolt and walking out like nothing had happened. The house was still, but it didn't feel like home. It felt violated, like something sacred had been trampled. "Now?" I asked, breath shallow. Sarah nodded, her expression a blend of satisfaction and quiet fury. "Now." Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, calm as ever, and dialed the non-emergency police number. Every detail lined up, every second documented. Our revenge. Prepared with precision, Sarah explained to the dispatcher, calmly and precisely, that we had live video evidence of an active break-in at our residence, though the suspect had just exited the property. She gave our address and our hotel contact info, and the dispatcher responded with crisp professionalism, assuring us that an officer would be dispatched to our home to investigate, while another unit would head to our hotel to take our full statement and review the footage. Everything was falling perfectly into place. The fury inside me had cooled into a razor-sharp clarity. This was justice in motion. We had caught her red-handed, and now all that was left was to seal the deal. We saved the footage, made 3 backup copies just in case, and waited with electric anticipation. Exactly 1 hour later, there was a firm knock on our hotel door. "That'll be them," I said with a grin breaking across my face for the first time in days. I felt victorious, like I'd done what every husband and father hopes to do: protect what matters most. I opened the door expecting officers with notepads, ready to listen, ready to act. But instead, I found a man with a badge and a face like granite. A detective. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers, hands hovering near their belts. Something was off. There was no warmth, no concern, just cold, assessing stares. The detective stepped forward and didn't ask a single question about the break-in or our evidence. Instead, he held up a folded piece of paper, his tone flat as steel. "Jack Miller," he asked, "I have a warrant for your arrest." Just like that, the ground dropped out from beneath me. The perfect plan, the moment of triumph, obliterated in an instant. All I could do was stare. Sarah gasped behind me, stunned silent. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. We were the victims. We had the footage. We were the ones who called. How the hell had this turned around? My mind spun, trying to connect dots that didn't make sense, but in the pit of my stomach, I already knew. This wasn't coincidence. It was Karen. Her stench was all over this. Somehow, she'd flipped the board while we were still lining up the pieces. We thought we were catching a petty tyrant, but instead, we'd cornered something venomous. We thought we were laying a trap for a mouse. Turns out, we had poked a viper, and the viper had already sunk its fangs. Let me take you back to where it all began. 1 year ago, when Sarah and I moved into the Oak Creek subdivision, chasing the peace that the glossy brochure had promised us. Peaceful lakeside living, it said, and at first glance, it lived up to every word. Manicured lawns stretching under towering oak trees, a quiet little dock where old Mr. Henderson cast his fishing line each morning, and evenings that echoed only with the gentle hum of crickets and the distant lapping of lake water. We had saved for years, scraping together enough to buy what we believed would be our forever home. The place where we'd grow old together, maybe watch our grandkids chase fireflies across the yard. That first month was picture perfect. Neighbors welcoming us with casseroles and clinking wine bottles, friendly waves during morning walks, golden sunsets painting the sky as we sipped coffee on the back porch whispering, "We did it. We made it." Then came Karen. She introduced herself as the HOA president, a title she clutched like a royal scepter. Her first visit came bearing a brick-dense lemon pound cake that somehow managed to taste both sour and dry, and an even denser binder full of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, 3 inches thick and brimming with bureaucratic madness. "Just a little light reading," she said with a hollow chuckle, her eyes sharp and cold beneath her smile. "We like to keep things orderly here at Oak Creek. That's how we protect our property values." I should have known then. Orderly was her code word for under my complete control. The first warning came just a week later, an envelope, crisp and white, taped dead center to our front door. A $25 fine. Our offense. The garden hose had not been coiled in a perfectly circular pattern. I laughed out loud, thinking it was some elaborate welcome prank. I called the number on the notice, expecting clarification. Karen answered on the first ring. "Ah, Mr. Miller," she chirped, her voice dripping with sugary insincerity. "So glad you reached out. Prompt payment of fines is vital to community harmony." I tried to reason with her, explained that the hose was coiled and tucked next to the spigot. It wasn't some hazard or eyesore. I recently lived through what can only be described as every homeowner's worst nightmare. Our HOA president brazenly let herself into my locked house and began rifling through our personal belongings like she had every right to be there. Her excuse? She claimed she was removing unauthorized violations, but the only thing that actually got removed that day was her freedom once we handed the footage over to the police. Let me take you back to the beginning. The first red flag was a greasy fingerprint smudged across my wife's jewelry box. I was 100 miles away, sitting in a silent hotel room. But there she was, Karen, clearly visible on our security feed, standing in our bedroom and digging through drawers as if she owned the place. My jaw clenched and my fists tightened with fury, while Sarah, calm as ever, simply zoomed in on the footage and rested her hand on my arm. We had been preparing for this moment for months. We always knew Karen was reckless, but we never expected her to cross a line so boldly and violate our home with such shameless audacity. Seeing it live on camera made it all real. No more guessing, no more doubt. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "This isn't about HOA rules," I growled. "This is a break-in, plain and simple." All she had taped to our door was a bogus citation for an unauthorized avian structure. A birdhouse, painted bright blue by our daughter before heading off to college. That birdhouse wasn't just decor. It was bait. We knew Karen's inflated ego and her master key would eventually lead her right into our trap. But what shocked us wasn't just that she entered, it was how far she went. She tore through closets, rummaged through our bedroom, and acted like she had absolutely nothing to lose. When she opened my sock drawer, that was the final straw. This wasn't about compliance. This was a full-on invasion. My heart pounded like a drum. "Jack," Sarah whispered, eyes still locked on the screen. "Let her keep going. The deeper, the better." And she was right. My fury ignited the spark, but her quiet strategy set the trap. Karen had no idea that every move she made was being recorded. Tiny cameras hidden in smoke detectors, digital clocks, even fake outlets, all motion activated, all feeding directly to a secure cloud she could never access or erase. We watched as she strolled into my office, casually brushed her fingers over my desk, picked up a framed photo of me and my dad, sneered at it, then set it back down with an arrogance that made my blood boil. That moment hit me hard. It wasn't about policy or neighborhood rules anymore. It was about control, about her relishing the power trip of violating a space where she was never welcome. Uninvited and shameless, she moved through our home like she owned it, not just to enforce any rule, but to prove she could invade our lives at will. A sickness infecting the quiet safety of our community, and at last, we had the antidote. "Okay, she's heading for the living room," Sarah murmured, eyes locked on the screen as she switched cameras with practiced ease, right past the so-called violation. Karen didn't even glance at the birdhouse that supposedly justified this trespass. No, her real target was much darker. She wanted control, power, a front-row seat to our private world. She drifted to the bookshelf and casually pulled out a photo album, flipping through it like she had a right to our memories. My stomach twisted into knots as she lingered on a picture from our last anniversary, Sarah and me smiling on a beach, and then, with no shame, snapped a photo of it with her phone. Why? Was she building some twisted dossier on us? Some power-fueled gallery of what she could take without permission? My blood was boiling now, fists clenched tight enough to shake. I wanted to storm in, watch the smug vanish from her face, but I held it together, for now. "That's it," I said through gritted teeth. "We have enough, breaking and entering. Theft." She even pocketed Sarah's silver locket like it was evidence. The plan was clear. We'd call the police, send them the live feed, and let them walk in mid-crime to drag her out in cuffs. Justice. Clean and direct. But Sarah, steady as ever, placed her hand gently over mine. "Not yet," she said. "Let her stay. Every second is another nail in her coffin." Her logic was ice-cold brilliance, while I was all heat and fury, but I nodded. We kept watching as Karen crept into the kitchen, rummaging through drawers, peeking in the fridge like she was on some bizarre HOA inspection for expired milk. It was absurd. Who does that? She moved like she had all the time in the world. No. Clue her every move was being streamed and saved in real time. Finally, she returned to the door, hesitated just long enough to shoot a look of disgust at the birdhouse, and gave it a petty little kick. One last spiteful gesture before unlocking the deadbolt and walking out like nothing had happened. The house was still, but it didn't feel like home. It felt violated, like something sacred had been trampled. "Now?" I asked, breath shallow. Sarah nodded, her expression a blend of satisfaction and quiet fury. "Now." Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, calm as ever, and dialed the non-emergency police number. Every detail lined up, every second documented. Our revenge. Prepared with precision, Sarah explained to the dispatcher, calmly and precisely, that we had live video evidence of an active break-in at our residence, though the suspect had just exited the property. She gave our address and our hotel contact info, and the dispatcher responded with crisp professionalism, assuring us that an officer would be dispatched to our home to investigate, while another unit would head to our hotel to take our full statement and review the footage. Everything was falling perfectly into place. The fury inside me had cooled into a razor-sharp clarity. This was justice in motion. We had caught her red-handed, and now all that was left was to seal the deal. We saved the footage, made 3 backup copies just in case, and waited with electric anticipation. Exactly 1 hour later, there was a firm knock on our hotel door. "That'll be them," I said with a grin breaking across my face for the first time in days. I felt victorious, like I'd done what every husband and father hopes to do: protect what matters most. I opened the door expecting officers with notepads, ready to listen, ready to act. But instead, I found a man with a badge and a face like granite. A detective. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers, hands hovering near their belts. Something was off. There was no warmth, no concern, just cold, assessing stares. The detective stepped forward and didn't ask a single question about the break-in or our evidence. Instead, he held up a folded piece of paper, his tone flat as steel. "Jack Miller," he asked, "I have a warrant for your arrest." Just like that, the ground dropped out from beneath me. The perfect plan, the moment of triumph, obliterated in an instant. All I could do was stare. Sarah gasped behind me, stunned silent. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. We were the victims. We had the footage. We were the ones who called. How the hell had this turned around? My mind spun, trying to connect dots that didn't make sense, but in the pit of my stomach, I already knew. This wasn't coincidence. It was Karen. Her stench was all over this. Somehow, she'd flipped the board while we were still lining up the pieces. We thought we were catching a petty tyrant, but instead, we'd cornered something venomous. We thought we were laying a trap for a mouse. Turns out, we had poked a viper. And the viper had already sunk its fangs. Let me take you back to where it all began. 1 year ago, when Sarah and I moved into the Oak Creek subdivision, chasing the peace that the glossy brochure had promised us. Peaceful lakeside living, it said, and at first glance, it lived up to every word. Manicured lawns stretching under towering oak trees, a quiet little dock where old Mr. Henderson cast his fishing line each morning, and evenings that echoed only with the gentle hum of crickets and the distant lapping of lake water. We had saved for years, scraping together enough to buy what we believed would be our forever home. The place where we'd grow old together, maybe watch our grandkids chase fireflies across the yard. That first month was picture perfect. Neighbors welcoming us with casseroles and clinking wine bottles, friendly waves during morning walks, golden sunsets painting the sky as we sipped coffee on the back porch whispering, "We did it. We made it." Then came Karen. She introduced herself as the HOA president, a title she clutched like a royal scepter. Her first visit came bearing a brick-dense lemon pound cake that somehow managed to taste both sour and dry, and an even denser binder full of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, 3 inches thick and brimming with bureaucratic madness. "Just a little light reading," she said with a hollow chuckle, her eyes sharp and cold beneath her smile. "We like to keep things orderly here at Oak Creek. That's how we protect our property values." I should have known then. Orderly was her code word for under my complete control. The first warning came just a week later, an envelope, crisp and white, taped dead center to our front door. A $25 fine. Our offense. The garden hose had not been coiled in a perfectly circular pattern. I laughed out loud, thinking it was some elaborate welcome prank. I called the number on the notice, expecting clarification. Karen answered on the first ring. "Ah, Mr. Miller," she chirped, her voice dripping with sugary insincerity. "So glad you reached out. Prompt payment of fines is vital to community harmony." I tried to reason with her, explained that the hose was coiled and tucked next to the spigot. It wasn't some hazard or eyesore. But her tone shifted like a slammed door. The sweetness vanished, replaced by a cold, robotic sharpness. "The rules, Mr. Miller, are not guidelines," she snapped. "They are the law. Section 4, paragraph C, subsection 2, clearly states that all hoses must be stored in." And she kept going, quoting policy like scripture, as if the fate of the neighborhood rested on the curvature of my garden hose. That was the first crack in the illusion of peace we had worked so hard to build, and the first glimpse of the petty tyrant we would come to know all too well. A neat and aesthetically pleasing manner, she finished coldly, her voice like the screech of metal. Your haphazard loop was neither. I stood there dumbfounded. A fine for a messy garden hose. It was laughable, absurd, something out of a satirical sketch. But Sarah, always the voice of calm reason, just sighed and said, "Pay the $25. Jack, this isn't a hill worth dying on." So I paid it. And that, I now realize, was my first and biggest mistake. That single act of compliance was blood in the water, and Karen? She was a shark who had just caught the scent. From that point on, the notices arrived with mechanical regularity. Our mailbox. Too close to the curb by half an inch. Fine. A lone dandelion in the lawn. Fine. Recycling bin left out 3 hours too long. Fine. It became a relentless drip of pettiness, a psychological torture by bureaucracy. And it wasn't just us under siege. My neighbor Louis, a retired plumber, with a wicked sense of humor and a passion for eccentric yard decor, became her favorite target. Louis loved flamingos, garden gnomes, and those strange spinning flower pinwheels. To Karen, his lawn was visual blasphemy, a personal challenge to her iron rule. His HOA file must have been thicker than her own rulebook. Faded gnome hats? Fine. Flamingos leaning at an unapproved angle? Fine. Wind spinners producing? Aggressive whistling? You guessed it, another fine. But Louis, God bless him, turned it into a sport. He'd march over to our shared fence, waving a fresh citation like a trophy. "Got another one, Jack," he'd holler. This time, Sir Reginald's guilty of loitering with intent to be whimsical, $50. And then the next day, just to needle Karen, he'd add another ridiculous ornament to his growing collection. A frog with sunglasses or a dinosaur, holding a free hug sign. I admired his defiance, but it couldn't mask the reality that the peace we'd moved here for was dissolving fast. Every trip outside felt like a performance under scrutiny. I found myself obsessing over lawn height, trimming hedges with a level, second-guessing the placement of my trash bins like it was a test. I was spiraling, slowly becoming as obsessive as she was. And the worst part? The rules weren't even applied equally. Karen's own yard looked like an overgrown jungle, and her friends on the HOA board? They could leave their boats parked in their driveways for weeks without consequence. Blatant violations, but no fines, no warnings. It wasn't about order or harmony. It was a dictatorship disguised as community standards, and Karen ruled with petty tyranny and unchecked power. Karen had her inner circle, a small, obedient group of board members who rubber-stamped her every decision without question. Whether it was fear, flattery, or the intoxicating taste of borrowed authority, they enabled her completely, enforcing her petty rule with silent nods and complicit smiles. Most of the neighborhood, meanwhile, lived in quiet submission, paying their ridiculous fines, trimming their lawns to regulation height, and praying they wouldn't be next. No one wanted to become her latest obsession. They'd seen what happened to those who pushed back, like the Pattersons, a kind young family who dared to challenge one of her fines. Karen responded by weaponizing the HOA against them, lien after lien on their property, constant harassment, baseless code violations. Eventually, they packed up and left, their dream home turned nightmare. Watching it all, my temper burned hotter by the week. I'm not someone who backs down from a fight, especially when it comes to protecting my home, my sanctuary. Every new fine, every smug little notice taped to our door felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to storm down the cul-de-sac, knock on the door of her soulless beige house, and unload every ounce of fury I had bottled up. I had speeches prepared, entire monologues built up in my head. But Sarah always stopped me. "It's what she wants, Jack," she'd say, calm and firm. "She wants you to lose it, to scream and rage so she can paint you as the crazy new guy. Don't give her the satisfaction. We have to be smarter." And as much as it grated on me, she was right. My hot-headed instincts would only play into Karen's hands. So we swallowed our pride. We paid the stupid fines, coiled the garden hose into perfect circles, yanked every stray dandelion before it had a chance to bloom. We transformed ourselves into shining examples of Karen's oppressive utopia, all while we waited, biding our time, playing the long game. We knew her type. Power-hungry people like Karen always push too far. They can't help themselves. They escalate and escalate until they finally cross a line that can't be ignored. We just didn't realize that her fatal mistake wouldn't be some outrageous fine or public humiliation. It would be personal. It would be cruel. It would target Sarah. And when it came, it wasn't a form letter or a bogus citation. It was the destruction of something sacred. Sarah's mother had passed away suddenly the year before we moved to Oak Creek, and the loss had gutted her. Her mother had been a passionate gardener, someone who could coax life out of even the most reluctant. Soil, flowers, vegetables, wild herbs. Everything she touched bloomed to honor her mother's memory. Sarah created a small memorial garden in a sunny patch of our backyard, a quiet, beautiful space that reflected everything her mom had loved. It wasn't grand or flashy, just a simple circle of smooth river stones, a modest stone bench, and her mother's favorite flowers, lavender, gardenias, and moonflowers that bloomed under the stars. It became Sarah's sanctuary, a place of peace and remembrance, where she could sit with a cup of tea and feel close to the woman she'd lost. I'd often glance out the window and see her there, still and serene, with a soft, sad smile on her face. That garden was the most heartfelt part of our so-called peaceful lakeside living. But of course, Karen didn't see it that way. To her, it wasn't a sacred memorial. It was an unapproved landscape alteration, an aesthetic crime against the uniformity she so obsessively guarded. A week after Sarah planted the final moonflower, the now familiar white envelope appeared on our door, but this time it wasn't a fine, it was an ultimatum. We had 48 hours to remove the unauthorized rock formation and non-native plantings and return the lawn to its original, uniform state. Failure to comply would result in the HOA hiring a contractor to rip it out and billing us for the destruction, plus a $500 penalty. I went cold reading it. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about regulations. It was about cruelty, deliberate and calculated. Karen knew exactly what that garden meant. Weeks earlier, during one of her property line prowls, we'd had a short, civil conversation with her about it. Sarah had gently explained its significance, even mentioned her mother's passing. Karen had nodded, lips tight, eyes cold, and muttered, "Make sure you check the rule book." That wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. And now, she was making good on it. I wanted to explode, to tear that smug rule book to shreds and set fire to every copy she had. But then I looked at Sarah. She wasn't angry, she was shattered. Her eyes welled with tears, her voice trembled as she whispered, "She's going to make us tear down Mom's garden." That's when everything inside me shifted. This was no longer a battle of fines or weeds or garden hoses. This wasn't about HOA regulations. It was about grief, love, and respect. This was war. And the question I had been silently asking myself for months, how far would I go to protect what matters most, was finally answered. As far as it takes. You don't attack someone's heart. You don't desecrate the memory of their loved ones. You don't break something sacred just to prove you can. My rage, once wild and blazing, narrowed into something colder, sharper, like a blade honed for a single purpose. "No," I said, my voice calm and deadly quiet. "She is not going to make us do anything." I finished, my voice steady with a resolve I hadn't felt in weeks. "We're going to handle this." Sarah looked up at me, eyes glassy with tears, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are we going to do, Jack? If we don't comply, she'll send someone to destroy it." I knelt in front of her, took her trembling hands in mine, and said with absolute certainty, "We're not fighting her on her terms anymore. We're not going to argue about rules or appeal to her twisted sense of order. We're going to bring her down, not just unseat her, but dismantle her entire little kingdom, brick by brick. We're going to expose her for the corrupt, power-drunk fraud that she is." And in that moment, I saw it, a flicker in Sarah's eyes, something fierce and familiar. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the quiet fire she'd buried under all the grief and exhaustion. "How?" she asked. That night, sleep never came. Instead, we planned. My first instinct was to stand guard over the garden and dare anyone to touch it, fists ready, heart pounding. But Sarah, calm and precise as ever, laid it out clearly. "That's a fight we'll lose, Jack. She'll slap a lien on our house. She controls the board. She controls the process. We need real proof, something bigger than petty fines, something criminal, something that a judge would care about, not just her HOA circus." And that's when the idea began to take shape. A trap. We knew Karen was invasive, always watching, always pushing boundaries. We suspected she'd crossed the line before, maybe even gone into homes when no one was there. But suspicion wasn't enough. We needed undeniable proof. The very next day, I paid a landscaping crew in cash to carefully uproot the entire garden, every stone, every flower, every piece of it, preserved and moved into a climate-controlled storage unit. It cost a small fortune, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let her desecrate something so meaningful. We replaced it with a sterile green, square, trimmed and uniform, the kind of dead perfection Karen worshipped. It looked empty, hollow, but that was the point. Then we went online and ordered top-of-the-line surveillance gear, tiny cameras, nearly invisible, with crystal-clear audio, motion sensors, and full night vision. When they arrived, I spent an entire weekend turning our home into a fortress of observation. I installed cameras in every single room, the garage, the porch, even in everyday objects. I checked every angle, tested every feed, and configured the footage to stream directly to an encrypted offsite server. No erasing, no tampering. We weren't going to miss a thing. And finally, we prepared the bait. It had to be subtle but effective, something technically against the rules, but minor enough that Karen would feel righteous entering the house to document the offense herself. Something that would call to her compulsive need for control, her ego whispering that she could get away with anything. That's when it hit me, the perfect bait. My daughter's birdhouse. Bright, hand-painted, joyfully unique. Everything Karen despised in one innocent object. It was cheerful, handmade, and defiantly not beige. It wasn't just decoration, it was a challenge. So we set the stage. We sent out a bubbly email through the HOA mailing list, announcing that we were heading out of town for a week to visit my sick aunt. It was all theater. We packed our bags, loaded the car in full view of the neighborhood, smiled and waved like a Norman Rockwell painting, then drove just 10 miles away to a cheap motel with decent internet and paper-thin walls. We checked in, fired up the laptop, and pulled up the live feeds from the cameras. The house looked calm, quiet, vulnerable. Now, all we had to do was wait, and wait we did. But not for long. On the second day, just after lunch, we saw it. A beige sedan pulling up to our curb with all the subtlety of a predator in broad daylight. "Karen's here," I muttered. The trap was primed. The queen had arrived to make her move. The tension in that stuffy motel room was suffocating. Sarah and I huddled over the laptop, watching every pixel of the doorbell camera feed. The image was crystal clear. There she was, Karen, climbing out of her car with a clipboard clenched like a royal decree, her face twisted in that familiar mask of righteous fury. She stomped up the walkway like she was about to lead a crusade, her eyes locked onto the little blue birdhouse proudly displayed in the front window. "Here we go," Sarah whispered, her fingers tightening around my thigh. My pulse surged with a potent mix of adrenaline and dark satisfaction. For months, Karen had been this phantom, an anonymous enforcer lurking behind notices and fines. But now, she was front and center, the unwitting star of our carefully staged production. We watched her stand there, scrutinizing the birdhouse like it was a threat to national security. She scribbled on her clipboard, then ceremoniously taped. A violation notice to our front door, her usual performance, the act of legitimacy before the intrusion. And then, she crossed the line. She reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a key. Not just any key, the HOA emergency master key, the one meant strictly for crises like fires or floods. The one she'd pressured the last board into, giving her access to, using safety as a pretense. I felt a flash of triumph blaze through my chest. I had replaced our front lock with a brand new high-security deadbolt just days before. There was no way that old key was going to work. This wasn't just a test of her access. It was a test of her hubris. And we were about to see just how far she'd go to enforce her twisted version of order. I had made damn sure that key wouldn't work, double-checked the lock myself. So when Karen jammed it into the deadbolt and met nothing but resistance, a flash of irritation twisted her face, and I couldn't help but let out a sharp laugh. Nice try, you old tyrant. But of course, she wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and made a call, pacing our porch like a general plotting her next move. We couldn't hear the words, but we could easily imagine them. Her voice saccharine, full of false urgency, spinning a tale of emergency access and non-compliant residents. A half hour later, a locksmith van rolled up, plain white with no logo, like something from a low-budget heist film. The man who stepped out looked thoroughly unbothered, like he'd done this a dozen times before. He and Karen had a hushed exchange on the porch. He gave the birdhouse a bored glance, shrugged, and set to work. I clenched my fists as I watched him violate our front door in broad daylight. "Is this even legal?" Sarah whispered, her voice brittle with disbelief. "Can a locksmith just break into someone's house like that?" I shook my head, jaw tight. Not without a signed work order from the homeowner. But Karen's probably telling him she's invoking emergency powers on behalf of the HOA and that she'll sign anything needed. She's building her alibi. Less than 5 minutes later, we heard it through the audio feed, the subtle click of defeat. The lock surrendered. The door creaked open. Karen handed over a wad of cash, took the receipt, and watched her hired hand drive off. He was just a tool. She was the blade. She stood there a moment, breathing deeply like a villain savoring her triumph, then stepped inside with the pomp of a queen entering her spoils. "We're in," I murmured, and Sarah immediately switched to the living room feed. There she was, standing in the center of our home, eyes darting like a thief in a museum, that grotesque smirk stretched across her face. And just like that, she walked right past the birdhouse, the supposed justification for this entire farce, and began her inspection. What followed was both maddening and utterly validating. She opened drawers, rifled through cabinets, sneered at our family photos as if judging our memories, and worst of all, casually slipped Sarah's locket, a family heirloom, into her pocket as if it were hers to take. With every step she took, every intrusion into our life, our case grew stronger, her mask slipped further, and the evidence mounted like kindling for the fire we were about to light. That IT played out even better than we had hoped. Just as Karen was knee-deep in our kitchen drawers, my phone buzzed. A text from Louie. "Dude, Karen's at your house. She just had a locksmith break in. What's going on?" I couldn't help but grin. Louie was solid, always had our back. I shot back a quick reply. "I know. It's all part of the plan. Stay quiet. Just watch." A minute later came his response, half a dozen shocked face emojis. He didn't know the details, but he trusted me. The idea of standing up to Karen probably felt like a pipe dream to most of our neighbors after living under her reign for so long. But we were about to change that forever. After what felt like a slow-motion eternity, Karen finished her creepy tour of our life. She returned to the front door, gave the birdhouse one final sneer, and walked out, casually locking the new, broken lock behind her like she hadn't just committed a crime. The camera feed showed our home, once again still and silent. Sarah and I sat frozen, staring at each other. We didn't need words. We had everything. The illegal entry, the fake justification, the theft. All of it captured in crisp, high-def video, time-stamped and irrefutable. Karen was finished. I leaned back in that stiff motel chair, the months of anxiety and frustration melting away, replaced by a deep, victorious calm. Sarah, focused and fierce, picked up her phone and called the police, laying out the situation with perfect clarity, no drama, just facts. She told them about the break-in, the video evidence, the locket, all of it. The dispatcher was calm and assured, promising an officer would be sent to our house to secure the scene and another to the motel to take our statements. It felt like we were finally taking back control. We waited, practically buzzing, the anticipation. Electric. We imagined the moment Karen opened her door to see the police. We imagined the ripple effect, neighbors stepping out to watch justice arrive, maybe even cheer. When the knock finally came, 3 firm, deliberate raps, I whispered, "Showtime." To Sarah, barely containing my excitement. I felt invincible, ready to deliver the moment we'd been working toward. I swung the door open, smiling wide, my words already rehearsed. But the second I saw who was standing there, the blood drained from my face. It wasn't the friendly neighborhood patrol officer I had imagined. It was a detective in a wrinkled, ill-fitting suit, flanked by 2 stone-faced uniformed officers, whose presence drained every ounce of triumph from the air. They weren't there for a statement. They weren't there to shake my hand or review the footage. The detective's cold, flat eyes locked onto mine as he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and said the words that shattered everything. "Jack Miller, I have a warrant for your arrest." For a moment, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. The world seemed to tilt, and the floor might as well have vanished beneath me. My masterstroke, the plan that was supposed to bring justice, had snapped shut like a trap, and I was the one caught in it. My mind blanked, every word turning to static. Arrest me? For what? Behind the detective, one of the officers reached for his cuffs, his stance rigid and ready. Sarah gasped, a soft, strangled sound behind me, and I could feel her panic rising. I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, to call out the insanity of it all, but then the cooler, more rational part of my brain, the part Sarah had helped build, took over. You don't shout at armed officers with a warrant. That's how a bad day becomes a catastrophic one. I forced my mouth to move. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice barely my own. The detective gave a dry, almost pitying chuckle. "No mistake, Mr. Miller. Turn around. Hands behind your back." Heat flooded my face. Anger, humiliation, disbelief. They were going to cuff me in a motel hallway, like some criminal. "On what charge?" Sarah snapped, her voice trembling but fierce as she stepped beside me like a lioness guarding her wounded mate. The detective didn't even glance at her. His stare stayed on me, icy and immovable. Terroristic threats. Illegal possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Conspiracy. The words hit like bricks. Terroristic threats? Felon? Firearm. None of it made sense. It was like watching a life you didn't recognize unravel in slow motion. Conspiracy. And the firearm charge. Now that was downright laughable if it hadn't been so terrifying. I'd never been convicted of anything in my entire life, and I certainly didn't own a gun. The accusation was absurd, a complete fabrication, and I finally found my voice to say so. "This is a setup," I told the detective, my words sharp with disbelief. "I've never been convicted of anything. I don't own a gun." His response was cold and robotic. "You can tell it to the judge. Turn around." That was it. No explanation, no room to breathe. I slowly turned, heart pounding, and placed my hands behind my back. The click of the handcuffs locking in place echoed like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Sharp, final, and humiliating. In that instant, a vision of Karen's face flashed. In my mind, smirking with satisfaction. She'd won, not just by catching us in our own trap, but by rewriting the entire script, casting herself as the frightened victim and me as the unhinged aggressor. She didn't just break into our house. She had broken into the very machinery of the justice system and rigged it against us. As the officers escorted me down the motel hallway, doors cracked open, curious eyes watching another criminal taken away. The sting of shame was overwhelming. I had planned to be the man who liberated our neighborhood. Now, to everyone watching, I was just another cautionary tale in handcuffs. Sarah walked beside me, pale but burning with quiet fury, every step screaming resistance. The detective, a few steps ahead, was already on the phone. "Yeah, we got him," I heard him say casually. The complainant was right. He's not happy. That word, complainant, it hit me like a punch. Karen. She had filed a false report in advance, spun a web of lies convincing enough to secure a warrant. She must have claimed I threatened her. Maybe said I was unstable or stalking her. And the gun? That was her masterstroke, fabricating a weapon to make me seem dangerous, giving them legal ground to treat me like a threat. They shoved me into the back of the cruiser, the heavy door closing with a final, gut-punching thud, and I was swallowed by the sterile gray interior, vinyl seats, wire mesh, a cage of presumed guilt. Outside, I saw Sarah, her hands clenched, her expression a hurricane of rage, heartbreak, and helplessness. As the car pulled away, she mouthed the words that kept me breathing through the rising panic. "I love you. Don't worry." But I was worried. More than that, I was terrified. We had crystal clear footage of Karen blatantly breaking the law, but she had something even more powerful, a warrant signed by a judge. Suddenly, our perfect trap felt meaningless, our smoking gun reduced to background noise against her weaponized victimhood. It was our word in our video against her carefully scripted, emotionally charged complaint, signed, sealed, and sanctified by the system. Who would they believe? A man she had already painted as volatile and dangerous, or the long-standing, polished president of the HOA, who no doubt cried crocodile tears on the witness stand of bureaucracy? I already knew the answer. The system was never designed to protect people like me from people like her. It was designed to uphold comfort, continuity, and control for those already in power. The ride to the station passed in a disorienting haze, every turn of the wheels echoing in my head as I tried to unravel the impossible. How had she known? How had she stayed 2 steps ahead? And then it hit me. She'd felt the shift the moment we stood our ground over the garden. She'd sensed that we weren't going to roll over anymore. And so she went to work, building her defense before we'd even finalized our offense. It was disturbing, brilliant, and almost awe-inspiring in its cruelty. I had shown up to a chess match with a checker strategy, and she brought a wrecking ball. The police station was everything you'd expect from a place designed to reduce people into numbers: sterile walls, harsh lighting, and the unmistakable stench of bleach and defeat. They fingerprinted me, took my mug shot, and told me to look into the camera. I tried to summon some shred of stoicism, to hold on to some fragment of dignity, but all I could feel was injustice, heavy and suffocating. This was it now. I was no longer Jack Miller, husband, neighbor, planner. I was a case file with the word felon stamped in bold across the top. As they marched me toward a holding cell, the officer paused and let someone through, my lawyer. Sarah had called him. The moment the squad car pulled away, and thank God she had. He was serious, sharp, and worth every penny. He clapped a firm hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Jack, not one word. Don't speak until I've seen the full complaint." Then, turning to the officers with calm authority, he said, "I'm his attorney. My client invokes his right to remain silent." And just like that, I was led into a tiny cell, its metal bench and cold concrete walls swallowing me whole. The door slammed shut, the echo reverberating like a cruel laugh down the hallway. I was alone, with my rage, my fear, and my utter sense of failure. I had tried to protect my family, and somehow I ended up in a cage, stripped of control, of dignity, of the victory I had so carefully orchestrated. Karen had won. At that very moment, she was probably in my house, sipping herbal tea from my favorite mug, leafing through our stolen photo album like it was her trophy. The thought sparked something sharp and cold in my chest. Despair. Maybe she was untouchable. Maybe the system wasn't just broken, it was built to serve people like her. But just as I teetered on the edge of hopelessness, being led away from the booking desk, Sarah broke through the noise for the briefest moment. She brushed past the officers, pressing a tiny, folded note into my cuffed hand. Her voice was urgent, but low. "The gardener's invoice. Remember the gardener's invoice." It didn't make any sense at the time, just a cryptic phrase, wrapped in tension, but I clung to it like a rope in quicksand. A glimmer of possibility flickered through my fear. That's when it hit me. Karen might have been a few steps ahead, but she had no clue she was up against my queen. I wasn't alone. Sarah was still in the game. Sitting in that cell, perched on a cold, unforgiving slab of metal, was the longest hour of my life. The air smelled like old sweat and bleach, and the silence was broken only by the occasional buzz of a phone and the dull, lifeless shuffle of paperwork. My thoughts battled in silence. One part of me burned. Furious, impulsive, ready to tear the door off its hinges and go down swinging. That part whispered venomous ideas. If the system's rigged, why play fair? Why not meet fire with fire? But there was another part of me. The part Sarah had always championed. The part that thought in steps and strategies, not sparks and explosions. That voice reminded me that losing control was Karen's endgame. Her entire narrative hinged on me being dangerous, unhinged, unpredictable. If I gave in to that image now, in a police station surrounded by officers and cameras, I wouldn't just be playing into her hands. I'd be wrapping the ribbon on her win. So I forced a breath into my lungs, pushed the fury down, and started thinking like a chess player again. I needed to treat this not as defeat, but as the beginning of a new match. And just then, Mr. Harris, my lawyer, appeared at the bars. He looked weathered but sharp, his expression grave. Without a word, he slid a manila folder through the slot. "Okay, Jack," he said quietly, "I've read the complaint. It's a masterpiece of fiction. Truly. She claims you've been harassing her for months." His tone was dry, nearly bitter. "She's documented over a dozen incidents, supposed phone calls, accusations of stalking, even claims you screamed threats at her in front of other residents. Couldn't afford to be reckless, not now. Not when everything was hanging by a thread." As Harris laid out the web Karen had spun, I could feel the venom of injustice burning in my veins, but I forced myself to stay still, to stay cold. She had built a case of fiction so polished, so rehearsed, that even the system believed it. She'd told them I made veiled threats, that I stood over her in the garden and threatened to bury her if she so much as touched a flower. She had her allies, too. HOA board members who'd signed affidavits backing her story, transforming a petty neighborhood feud into a fabricated tale of fear and menace. My stomach churned. I could practically hear her voice trembling for the police, see her dabbing her eyes with a tissue while spinning this whole mess into a narrative where she was the fragile, terrorized homeowner and I was the monster. "It's all lies," I said, trying to anchor myself. "And the gun charge." Harris exhaled, rubbed his temples, then said, "That's the poison pill." According to her, she saw me through my window, supposedly cleaning a rifle. Claimed I saw her watching and made a threatening gesture. Of course, there's no rifle. There's no gesture. It's complete nonsense. But it was just specific enough, just scary enough, to justify a search warrant. And then came the kicker. She gave the police my name with my middle initials reversed. They ran a background check and, surprise, it pulled up a felony conviction for a John F. Miller in another state. Not me, John P. Miller. A sloppy mistake, yes, but one the cops were all too eager to run with. It gave them a legal excuse to barge in and to cuff me like a criminal. Harris said we could clear that part up, but it wouldn't erase the damage. My house was breached. My name was stained, and I was sitting behind bars. This was my crossroads, the moment where I could either break or bend. The rage in me howled for justice by fire, but another part, quieter and stronger, reminded me why I was here. I wasn't here for revenge. That was Karen's game, spite and control. I was here for something more, for peace, for freedom, for Sarah, for our home, and the life we wanted to build without fear. That was the real war, and I had to fight it with brains, not fists. If I lashed out now, I'd become the villain Karen had invented. But if I played this smart, used her lies against her, dismantled her web thread by thread, I could reclaim everything she tried to steal, and maybe expose her for what she truly was. That I had to stay good, even under this crushing pressure. I had to be better, sharper, colder than her. My anger, once a wildfire, had hardened into something stronger, the steady heat of a forge, ready to shape the weapon I would become. "So what do we do?" I asked Harris, my voice calm but edged with iron. He noticed the shift in me, my posture. Straighter, my eyes clear, and for the first time, a small, approving smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "We play the long game," he said. "First, we get you out of here. The mistaken identity with the felony charge is our ticket. That mix-up with your middle initials gives us leverage. I'll have you out on bail by morning. But second, and this is the big one, we need more than just the break-in footage. Her lawyers will fight to have it thrown out as inadmissible. We have to dig deeper. We need to prove her justification was a total fabrication and that this break-in wasn't just a one-time crime. It was the culmination of a long pattern of harassment, manipulation, fraud, and outright abuse of power. We need to crush her credibility, destroy her grip on the HOA, and expose her as the liar she is. That's how we win. I nodded slowly, the plan forming in my mind like a battle map. But how? I asked. She owns the board. They're all terrified of her. No one's going to talk. Harris leaned forward, voice low, like a man discussing a dangerous heist. We don't need them to talk. We need evidence. The DA won't move unless we hand them something bulletproof. A neighbor dispute? That's just noise to them. But financial crimes? That's music. Show them she's been stealing from the HOA, mismanaging funds, enriching herself at the neighborhood's expense. That gets attention. That forces action. My heart sank again. The HOA books were off limits, locked in her control. No one had access but Karen. It felt like we were staring at a castle wall with no way in. I slumped slightly, the weight of it threatening to crush me again. But then, like a lightning bolt, I remembered Sarah's whisper, the strange, urgent message she'd passed me, the gardener's invoice. Of course, it all clicked. The landscaper I had quietly hired to move the memorial garden, the same one Karen had torn up, triggering our silent war. He had invoiced us privately, outside the HOA channels. And he had mentioned something weird, that Karen had tried to pay him off, to backdate work, to list services he hadn't actually done, all to justify mysterious expenses in the HOA budget. That invoice might be the crack in her armor, the proof she slipped up, got sloppy, and left a paper trail. Suddenly, the fortress didn't look so impenetrable anymore, etched with caution, curiosity, and something deeper, hope. I'd paid the gardener in cash, but he'd insisted on giving me a formal written invoice for his own records, an invoice that turned out to be our first piece of real ammunition. It listed every detail, including the fact that he had moved a memorial garden, and it was dated the day before Karen's ridiculous 48-hour ultimatum was set to expire. That invoice wasn't just a receipt. It was proof that we had complied with her orders, and more importantly, it was proof that her so-called emergency was a total fabrication. It was the thread Sarah had clung to, and I knew the moment she whispered those words to me that she had already begun pulling on it, unraveling Karen's carefully knit web of lies. When I walked out on bail, everything felt sharper, the sun warmer, the sky wider, like I'd been underwater and had finally broken the surface. But this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The first thing I did was hug Sarah so tightly I thought I'd never let go. While I'd been locked up, spiraling in frustration, she'd been quietly building our resistance. I've been busy, she said, her eyes blazing with resolve. Your arrest lit the fuse. People are done being scared. Now they're furious. Word of what had happened to me, arrested under blatantly false pretenses, had raced through the neighborhood like wildfire. Karen's reign of terror had finally crossed a line. It was one thing to be fined for your lawn being too long. It was another thing entirely to watch a neighbor dragged away in handcuffs because someone decided to twist the truth. That night, our home transformed into a command center for the rebellion. And the first person to show up floored me. Louis, the jokester, the guy who always stayed on the sidelines. But this time, his grin was gone. His face was set. This ends now, Jack, he said quietly, a steel edge in his voice. She's gone too far. Tell me what to do. And suddenly, we had a weapon we hadn't expected, Louis. He'd lived in Oak Creek for decades. He knew every story, every grudge, every buried complaint. He became our signal flare, our word-of-mouth warrior. Door to door, he went, not with sarcasm, but with quiet urgency, telling everyone what Karen had done, what she was capable of, and that we were standing up to her. He told them there would be a meeting at our house after dark. We didn't know if anyone would come. Fear runs deep when it's been part of your daily life for years. But as the sun set, one by one, they started arriving. Silent figures. In the dusk, couples holding hands, tired eyes peering out from beneath years of forced submission, stepping into our driveway not just to hear, but to be heard, nervous but resolute. The Hendersons, the Garcias, the Lees, family after family who had lived in quiet fear of Karen's tyranny, now stood together in our living room, united not just by shared suffering, but by a growing, righteous fire. For the first time, we weren't alone. Sarah took the front of the room like she'd been born for it, not with loud dramatics, but with the calm command of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't open with my arrest or even the break-in. She went straight to what truly spoke to people: money. My wife, the quiet accountant who used to avoid phone calls and preferred the company of spreadsheets, had spent the last 24 hours doing forensic work with terrifying precision. For the past year, she began, her voice clear and unwavering, I've been tracking every fine, every assessment, every fee increase issued by this HOA. She passed out a packet of documents, and as the pages shuffled and eyes scanned the columns, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Sarah had cross-referenced every HOA charge with the official budget reports Karen was legally obligated to file. The result was a revelation. The amount of money collected from residents was absurdly high, but the spending? A vague mess of bloated line items, landscaping services, consulting fees, legal expenses, all with no attached invoices or explanations. The HOA is taking in nearly triple what it actually spends on legitimate maintenance, Sarah said, pointing to the damning chart. So where's the rest going? A heavy silence followed, broken only by stunned murmurs as people turned to one another with wide eyes. It hit them all at once. They hadn't just been fined or bullied. They'd been systematically fleeced. That $50 fine for leaving a garbage can visible, the $100 penalty for string lights on a balcony, it wasn't about upholding community standards. It was a revenue stream, a racket. And just when the room was simmering with disbelief, Sarah struck with the final blow. I looked into the largest vendor listed for these payments, Lakeside Beautification Services. It was incorporated 2 years ago, operates out of a P.O. box, and the sole proprietor is a man named Bill Peterson. She paused, letting the silence build. That's Karen's husband. The reaction was instant and electric. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact at board meetings were now shouting, standing, telling their own stories of being forced to use that exact company for overpriced, poor quality work. The realization swept through them like wildfire. Karen had created a self-serving machine, one that handed out punishment and then profited from the solution. It was a classic kickback scheme, plain and dirty. Our quiet little video of her stealing a locket suddenly felt like a pebble compared to the boulder Sarah had just dropped in the center of the room. Child's play compared to this. This wasn't just petty corruption. It was grand larceny, a full-blown criminal enterprise cloaked in the sterile language of HOA bylaws. We had witness accounts, we had motive, and we had enough circumstantial evidence to make any prosecutor raise an eyebrow. But we were still missing the one thing that would make the whole thing undeniable: the hard proof, the smoking gun. We need the contracts, I said, my voice cutting through the growing storm of voices. We need the real financial records, the unfiltered bank statements, the original ledgers, not the sanitized versions Karen files for public view. The room went quiet, all eyes on me, the same troubling thought on everyone's mind. Those records were kept in the HOA's official office, which was, of course, in Karen's home. Accessing them legally felt impossible. Unlike her, we couldn't, and wouldn't, resort to breaking in. We needed to be smarter, cleaner, above reproach. The energy began to dip again, the hopeful flame flickering under the weight of reality. We were so close, but the last step felt like a locked door with no key in sight. Then, from the back of the room, a small, wavering voice pierced the gloom. It was Mrs. Gable, the HOA's former treasurer, a dignified older woman who had lived in Oak Creek since it was first built. Karen had pushed her out years ago, dismissing her as outdated and inefficient, and replacing her with a more modern system, meaning, of course, one only Karen could control. Mrs. Gable had been silent ever since, quietly nursing her pride and pain. But something about this gathering, the sense of unity, the injustice of my arrest, it had stirred something deep within her. She may have the new records, Mrs. Gable said, her voice delicate but unwavering, but I don't believe she ever got rid of the old ones. The room turned to her in stunned silence. What old records? Sarah asked softly. Mrs. Gable straightened her back, the spark of a forgotten strength in her eyes. When I was treasurer, we kept all original documentation, contracts, bank statements, incorporation papers, in a locked, fireproof filing cabinet. That cabinet wasn't kept in my house. It was stored in the basement of the Oak Creek Community Clubhouse. My heart slammed against my ribs. The clubhouse, the same. Underused building Karen constantly complained about, the same one she ignored unless she had to sign off on maintenance. She likely hadn't stepped into that basement in years. It was a blind spot, a forgotten relic from a time when the HOA served the community instead of exploiting it. If those files were still down there, untouched and uncorrupted, they could be the key to everything. The one piece she'd forgotten. The one thread she'd failed to cut. We had a chance, and suddenly, that locked door didn't seem so impossible to open anymore. The basement smelled of mildew and forgotten memories, a graveyard of broken pool chairs, dusty plastic snowmen, and the lingering spirit of long-past potlucks. But none of that mattered. Because there, against the far cement wall, sat the object of our quest. A gray, fireproof filing cabinet draped in a cobweb tarp like some sacred relic from a forgotten age. Mrs. Gable, her hand shaking slightly, but her resolve rock solid, led our little covert crew, me, Sarah, Louie, and Mr. Henderson, like a general guiding a squad of misfit commandos through enemy lines. "This is it," she said, barely above a whisper, her voice echoing eerily in the cavernous silence. From the pocket of her cardigan, she pulled out a small, tarnished brass key, her last connection to the HOA she once helped run with dignity and order. Let's hope she never changed the lock. My breath caught in my throat as she approached the cabinet and slid the key into place. She turned it. Nothing. The lock didn't budge. My stomach dropped like a stone in water. "She changed it," Mr. Henderson muttered, disappointment etched across his face. Louis let out a string of expletives that bounced off the concrete walls, earning a faintly scandalized blush from Mrs. Gable. We were crushed. The evidence, the final piece we so desperately needed, was right there, separated from us by a few inches of steel and a bitter twist of irony. We had no legal authority to break it open, no judge willing to grant a warrant yet. We had fought so hard, risked so much, and now, it felt like it was all slipping away in this musty basement. The silence was suffocating. But then, as always, it was Sarah who saw what we missed. She stepped closer, flashlight beamed tight and focused, and studied the lock. "Wait," she said, pointing. "It's not a key lock anymore. It's a keypad." Sure enough, the brass cylinder was gone, replaced by a small black panel with a numeric display and backlit buttons. "She upgraded it," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Probably thought it made it more secure." I leaned in, and my pulse quickened. I recognized the model immediately. It was a commercial-grade keypad I had worked with during my first job out of college at a home security company. It was popular 5 years ago, sturdy but not infallible. I knew its quirks, its vulnerabilities. I suddenly felt that familiar flicker of hope reigniting, the rush of adrenaline that came not from rage or fear, but from the quiet knowledge that, maybe, just maybe, we had a way in. And just like that, it all came flooding back, an old story from a colleague, a whispered rumor about a critical design flaw in this specific keypad lock model, a hidden backdoor meant for maintenance access. The company had issued a patch to fix it, but only if you manually updated the firmware. And knowing Karen's stingy nature and her utter disregard for anything she didn't see or control directly, I was willing to bet she never bothered with the update. "Wait a second," I said, my pulse spiking with sudden clarity. "I know this lock." Louis leaned in, eyes wide. "What's the code?" I shook my head. "Not exactly sure, but I remember the pattern. It's based on the serial number." I crouched down and asked Sarah to shine her light under the keypad, and there, just as I hoped, was a faded sticker with the serial number. I pulled out my phone, heart hammering in my chest, and punched the number into a search engine along with the phrase "maintenance mode." Seconds later, a post from a long-forgotten security forum popped up, a guide detailing the exact override procedure. I scanned it quickly, pressed the star key 3 times, then the pound key, then enter a 6-digit default password. My hands trembled as I reached out and followed the steps. The screen lit up, maintenance mode. We all froze. This was it. I slowly keyed in the default, 1-2-3-4-5-6. A long second passed. Then came the sound, the best sound I'd heard in weeks. Clunk. The lock disengaged. We didn't cheer. We just stood there, stunned, caught in a suspended moment of disbelieving silence. Sarah stepped forward and gently opened the drawer, and what we saw was everything: stacks of files, folders, receipts, original contracts, checks, ledgers. The entire financial history of the HOA laid bare in front of us like the bones of a long-dead monster. And not just old records, but recent ones too. Karen had continued using the cabinet all along, relying on its fireproof design and physical security to hide her corruption, never imagining her supposedly uncrackable lock had a secret door that someone like me would remember. We had it now. The proof, the motive, the trail of money. This wasn't just going to clear my name. It was going to burn her empire to the ground. There were two distinct sets of books, one pristine and polished for public inspection, and the other raw and damning, filled with the truth, a staggering surplus of community funds, contracts signed at laughably inflated rates with her husband's sham company, and copies of checks that transferred HOA money straight into his hands. But the real jaw-dropper was tucked at the back, a hidden document trail leading to a secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands with a balance north of $200,000. This wasn't petty theft or casual corruption. This was grand-scale embezzlement, calculated, continuous, and devastating. We didn't touch a thing. Instead, we snapped photos of every single page, every receipt, every line item, uploading it all to a secure cloud server right therein. The musty basement, our hands trembling with adrenaline. We had it now. The evidence so airtight, so undeniable, that it wouldn't just clear my name. It would dismantle Karen's entire empire. But we weren't taking it to the local cops. Not. After what Harris told us. We were bypassing the good old boys club entirely. This case was heading straight to the top. The real reckoning, though, wouldn't begin in court. It would start in Karen's own arena, the HOA meeting room, the heart of her false kingdom, surrounded by the very people she had ruled through fear. That's where we would strike first. The plan was surgical, crafted with precision by Sarah and Harris like a high-stakes heist. Phase 1 began with 2 calls. The first went to the state's district attorney, specifically the head of the Public Integrity Unit. Harris delivered a bombshell, a concise breakdown of Karen's crimes, from shell companies and fake invoices to international money laundering, and then handed them the motherlode, a private link to all the photographic evidence. They were hooked instantly. The second call went to a local investigative journalist, infamous for exposing political corruption and hungry for her next big story. The moment she saw the evidence, she practically leapt through the phone, demanding the exclusive. Now the trap was set, but not for a quiet takedown. This was a public spectacle in the making. Phase 2 was just as poetic. Louis, in his new role as a reluctant hero, unearthed a clause in the HOA bylaws, a clause Karen herself had written years ago to tighten her grip on power. Ironically, it gave homeowners the right to call an emergency meeting without board approval. He used it. The topic listed was vague: discussion of HOA financial integrity. Karen had no idea what was coming. Refusal wasn't an option. Papers listing her husband as the sole proprietor. Click. Screenshots of bank transfers from HOA accounts to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Each image hit like a hammer, and the crowd collectively gasped, the room shifting from stunned silence to a low buzz of disbelief and outrage. Karen's face drained of color. Her confident posture crumbled as her world came crashing down in real time. "This is a witch hunt," she barked, her voice cracking under the pressure. But no one was listening anymore. People weren't afraid of her now. They were angry, furious. The same neighbors who once whispered complaints in private were now standing, shouting, demanding answers. Sarah didn't flinch. "We have the original books. We have the contracts. We have your signature on every single fraudulent transaction." The DA investigators rose from their seats at the back, flashing badges as the cameraman captured every second. Karen stumbled back, eyes darting for an exit, but it was too late. "Karen West," one investigator said, stepping forward, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." As the cuffs went on, the crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in relief, in victory. For the first time, justice was louder than fear. Karen's board members stood frozen, their loyalty vaporized as they realized their queen had fallen. It was over. The reporter captured every tear, every stunned reaction, every breath of freedom reclaimed. Sarah squeezed my hand, and I looked at her, my brilliant, relentless wife, knowing I'd never seen anything more powerful than her standing tall in the face of tyranny. That night, Oak Creek didn't just remove a corrupt leader. It remembered who it was, a community that had been manipulated and silenced, now finally roaring back to life. With a final click, the screen lit up with a doctored budget placed side by side with the authentic one, and Karen's carefully constructed empire began to crumble in full view. Gasps erupted into angry murmurs, then full-on shouting, as neighbors recognized the depth of the betrayal. Even her once loyal board members edged away, their faces pale with shame and shock. Then came Sarah's final blow. Cool, composed, unstoppable. She clicked once more. On the screen appeared a bank statement from a Cayman Islands account, tied to a shell corporation in Karen's name. Final balance, $212,450. Karen's mask dropped entirely. Without a word, she spun on her heels and made for the exit, only to be intercepted by two plainclothes men who'd been seated quietly in the back. One flashed a badge and announced, calm but firm, "Karen Peterson, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering." Her face twisted into a look of pure devastation as the handcuffs snapped shut, the crowd erupting in cheers, the noise like thunder as their tormentor was let out. Not with her trademark clipboard, but in the back of an unmarked car. We had orchestrated every step with precision, and it had worked like a masterpiece. Karen and her husband both pled guilty to avoid standing trial before a jury made up of their victims. 5 years for her, 3 for him. The stolen funds were recovered and repurposed to restore the community they had plundered, leading to lower HOA dues for the first time in over a decade. As for me, the charges against me were dismissed with a formal apology, and the corrupt HOA board was officially dissolved. We held fresh elections, and Louis, once the jokester, now the hero, won in a landslide. Life in Oak Creek transformed. Neighbors smiled again. People chatted freely, planted what they wanted, lived how they pleased. And Sarah and I finally brought home her mother's memorial garden, carefully replanting it stone by stone in our yard. We topped it all off with the most outrageously colorful birdhouse we could find, placing it proudly in the front window, a bright, defiant monument to everything we had fought for, everything we had reclaimed. Because peace isn't something that's handed to you, it's something you rise up and earn.